Tuli's interview with Alexander Cockburn, with additional comments by myself, Norman Savitt, and Sylvia Topp. Hope you enjoy it.
And who's the guy in the hand? Eating out of his hand.
This is Archie. He's the
Archie, the star of our show.
He's the Revolting News mascot.
No, we're his mascot.
Hopefully.
I'm very happy to be with Alexander Cockburn, whom I consider America's best journalist. And we're going to talk about the press and politics. Alex has just published in the New York Press of April 15th an article called The Big Lie, which discusses the press in Clinton time and the press in general. And I'll start by reading, I'll make him read the first paragraph.
Oh. Hi, Tuli. That was nice, what you said about me.
Only the truth, nothing but the truth.
Okay, this is called The Big Lie. Sooner or later, usually sooner, most journalists want to belong. They want to be in good moral odor. They crave the blessings of the public and the respect of their peers. If they are David Brock or Joe Conason, they want to be invited to the White House, or at least called on the phone by Bill or Hillary, or more likely by Sid Blumenthal. There isn't a trade in existence whose practitioners require such monstrous injections of reassurance, or whose cravings for prizes and kindred tokens of esteem are so intense. I'll stop reading there.
All right, you've been in journalism a long time.
Yeah.
Since when?
I wrote my first piece when I was 16, and I'm 56, so that's 40 years ago. And my dad's was a journalist.
And you've been in America, U.S.?
72.
And so how would you compare British and American journalism?
When I first got here, I was very struck how, and I first covered a presidential campaign in 76. That was the Carter campaign. And I was really struck how the American journalists, didn't seem to be drunk. Because in England, you can't go around with journalists, they're boozers. They're just drunk after about 11 o'clock in the morning, they're all drunk. And I was thinking about it, the American journalists didn't seem to be drunks. And you'd see them, they'd even go to bed, when you were in a campaign trail, many of them go to bed quite early.
Well,
why? Is the question.
I know why. Actually, there is a great tradition of being drunk in American journalism. If you, a front page by, who was that guy?
Oh.
Chicago writer.
Ben Hecht.
Yeah, it was traditional, but I think the answer is now that in order to get a job on a newspaper, you have to go to journalism school. And in order to get into journalism school, you have to be, one, a fool, and two, well-dressed and middle class and everything else.
That's
so
right.
The profession has become more like being a graduate student who is assigned to report on certain.
English journalists have very low self-esteem. They're regarded as scum. They regard themselves as scum.
Good.
And so they're drunk out of self-pity and remorse. Whereas in America, what you say, they have incredibly high feelings of self-esteem. Well, deep down they know what they're doing is not a particularly elevating occupation. And so on the one hand, they like to think of themselves as performing an important function in the Republic. On the other hand, they know that most of the time they're performing fairly degraded services.
But I think in order to pass through the Columbia School of Journalism and get the degree, it's a kind of self-selection. Like if you want to work at the Times, I think that school or some other comparable school of journalism is a requisite. So it's sort of self-selecting. You wouldn't go there unless you believe that what the Times is doing is good journalism or worth the job.
There's a backwash to that. If you go around to the campuses, all the campuses which have journalism schools have terrible newspapers. Because all the kids in the J schools do their articles in the papers so they can show them to the New York Times hiring guy. And so, of course, all the articles are awful, muck. You know, and they're all objective and balanced and this, and some say that, and now for another view of Hitler and all this. Whereas in a campus which hasn't got a J school, it's not bad.
It's better. Yeah.
A little bit better. That's really the point of what I wrote here, that half the press, they're under the illusion, they keep saying, if only we can get back to the real issues. As though the public really wants to read about, you know...
As if they know what the real issues are.
As if they would know what the real issues are. And then they invent this little scenario whereby the public is dying to read about the Chilean social security system. Whereas, of course, I said the public is actually eager to read scandal, of course. You know, they want to read about Monica Lewinsky and the cement stains and all the rest of it because it's fun. And they think there's Bill and he's got a nice Jewish girl from Beverly Hills, and isn't that a good thing? And so here we have incredible pomposity from, here's an idiot called Walter Shapiro, who writes in USA Today. Actually, I always rather like USA Today, but I certainly don't like Walter Shapiro. Quote, "Sex sullies everyone." This is a serious man writing this. "From the moment the Monica Lewinsky story broke, we all lost our moorings." Of course, we didn't lose our moorings. We began to read with joy. This is him again. "The president, through his own conduct, may have forfeited much of the moral authority of his office." Notice the assumption that it's got moral authority, by the way. "But by slavering over the sexual details, the press has squandered some of its own credibility. Too often the media has," the guy's semi-literate, doesn't even know that media is plural, "used hypocrisy as an all-too convenient rationale for publicizing private peccadillos," which of course is what any newspaper should do. "Just because a candidate includes a smiling picture of his wife and family in his campaign ads is a flimsy excuse for questioning his fidelity." Can you imagine the pomposity of this? "Even candidates who piously champion family values do not automatically empower the press to dredge up old divorce decrees. In an era of poison politics, anything goes. Sex sells as surely as it sadly sullies serious subjects." I didn't realize you got so many S's.
Wow.
"Sadly sullies serious subjects." Every single sentence is ridiculous. Because, of course, A, sex is fun. B, you know, these candidates, they used to go gay baiting, you know, when they put out that little picture of them and the missus and the 2.7 children. And then it turned out he was, you know, out there in the gay bars. Well, aren't we meant to publish that? That's a good example.
Yeah, I have a few things to say about that. It reminds me of an old joke. This man is talking about his marriage, and he says, "Yeah, we have a real equal marriage. We divide our responsibilities. I decide whether we should recognize the Soviet Union and raise the armed forces budget, and she decides where we spend our vacation and how we raise the kids." And the other thing is, I'm not a Clinton fan. I'm sort of an anti-Clinton fan. But this was sort of something that made him seem really human. Like, this is the best thing he's ever done, is to have all of these affairs.
That's right.
And I did a cartoon right at the beginning of his term in which said, "What do we really know about Bill Clinton? Dodged the draft and had Jennifer show him her flowers. And then the next panel, it's been downhill ever since."
Yeah. I once in The Nation, I said, one of the best things about Bill Clinton is he spent most of the 80s with his head between Jennifer Flowers' thighs. And The Nation readers, the letters poured in, they were horrified by this.
Did you see her on TV?
No.
She's a wonderful woman.
I love her. I loved her
Yeah.
book. And The Nation readers said this is the most disgusting thing we've ever read. And I said, actually, it's the best thing about Bill Clinton, just like you. The best thing. I mean, John Kennedy just, I mean, you know, 30 seconds, just hopped on and hopped off, and that was it. And Bill, you know, he was considerate. Jennifer Flowers, a really thoughtful guy, you know.
Yeah, she liked him.
Liked him.
Yeah, she was lovely.
Yeah, and then he put all her clothes on and sat around and, you know, had a good time. There's incredible prudishness. There's another one I want to read. There's another guy who I think is line for line. even more pompous than Walter Shapiro, which is saying an awful lot. Jonathan Alter. Do you ever read him?
No, unfortunately, I see him on
He's a
cable.
nightmare. He's in Newsweek. Now, this is a good example of the role of the pundit. We can talk about the role of the pundit in a minute. Okay. He was on the Today Show right after the scandal began. You remember that first wonderful moments of the scandal when you realized that you were going to look at Monica Lewinsky every day. She's a nice-looking girl. And here he is on the second day, and Katie Couric says, what does this story do to us as a country? Well, obviously it delivers us from thinking about the social security system for a start. Well, here's Alter. Now, this is just exactly, he's not even writing, he's speaking. This is how his whole nature is. Well, what's really troubling me, Katie, and I think a lot of other people, is the effect of this, in that it increases public cynicism. You go out and you talk to people and you say, what do you think about this? And they say, everybody lies, all the politicians do it. The problem with that is breaks down the fundamental faith that we have to have in this system to have the kind of society we want to have. Just think about that. And the cynicism corrodes and kind of eats away at us as a country. And it's also just a disgusting, tawdry story that makes you want to take a shower when you're either reporting on it, or I think a lot of people are viewing it, have a tired of hearing about it already. It's only 2 days old.
You know the term dominant primate?
No, what?
Among primates, there's a male that's dominant, and he gets to fuck all the females and gets the food first. And the other sort of, some of them get shunted completely out of the community and don't even ever reproduce. And they go around like this, you know, with their heads bowed. And our president is considered a dominant primate in our society. He's holy, you know. And there are other people like that too, generals, popes, and so on. It explains human hierarchy simply, and it's not that simple. And I heard a guy on TV who had grown up with Clinton from kindergarten and had known him all his life. And this was right after the inauguration, and this is what he said. He said, you know, I don't know, I used to call him Bill, but I don't know how to call, I think I'll have to call him Mr. President now.
Incredible. The thing about Alter, what's interesting about that quote is that the way these pundits feel they have to constantly damp down the fires of cynicism. That's
a hell of a job here.
It's a hell of a job, because Americans are naturally cynical, thank God.
And, yeah, there's a lot to be cynical about here.
What?
There's a lot to be cynical here.
I know. Cynicism is the birth of opposition.
So, you're one of the few journalists on the other side, on the left side, the right side, you know what I mean. What effect do you think you're having, and why isn't there a daily newspaper of the left in America? We have you have something like things like that in England.
Not really.
Well,
What's the most liberal daily, I suppose, is the Guardian.
Yeah.
Right. What used to be called the Manchester Guardian. What is it? Well, I guess the reason it is a little bit to the left of mainstream American papers, I suppose, because there's a large social democratic party in England, the Labour Party, so the political gravity is different. The journalism of the left here at the moment is kind of a morass. Well, there isn't much of it, first of all. It barely exists. There isn't much of the left. I think there's a lot of dissidence and rather ebullient cynicism in society. You know, you go around, a lot of people, you know, if you go industrial, you know, the union types, a lot of people are very feisty and would like something different. And the political options, of course, are narrow as they always are. As far as journalism is concerned, I think it just isn't very feisty at the moment. And the nation's like a wet dishcloth, most of it.
Well, it's alas the best.
still not very
Yeah.
good. The best line-for-line writing is in a little paper on the West Coast called the Anderson Valley Advertiser, which is feisty stuff.
They try to introduce that into a few stores here.
No, it's too far away. I do, what you were saying about difference, I think you can, like, what do? I do a newsletter with Ken Silverstein and another guy friend of mine, Jeffrey Sinclair, which we sell about 4,000 of that now. It's 4,000 subscriptions, which is good. And that actually does go to a bunch of producers. I mean, it goes to a bunch of people out there, but it goes to producers and some editors, and so you can get stories into the mainstream that way. Apart, the established journalism has got so lazy and so conventional that in the late 60s and early 70s, a public interest organization in Washington, there are hundreds of public interest organizations with hard-working people toiling away at rooting out evil and exposing the evil man, and then they'll write it up in their press release. And then they put it out. Now, in the early 70s and mid-70s, there were enough mainstream papers that would still pick that stuff up, like about defense cost overruns. Now there's no one there to pick it up. So anyone who goes there with a bucket and just goes around, you can get a lot of stuff. Because they've got very, very respectable. Again, I think what you were saying about the training of these journalists is so narrow. A lot of these kids have been through no really shaking experience at all. So that's one thing.
Well, it's the collapse of the 60s, isn't it?
Well, and then even
the
60s what? When
left politics. And the collapse of the Soviet Union. Do you know Bertel Oman?
Yeah. I like Bertel.
You remember what was it called? The Left Humor Conference?
Did he actually have a left humor?
Comedy, yeah. A left comedy, first world left comedy conference and exposition. And I took part in that, a lot of people did. And I suggested that after the fall of the Soviet Union, we have the first left tragedy conference. But he didn't think that
the
was
first time was
funny.
farce, the second time was tragedy.
Leftists aren't very good at humor for some reason. And again, with the Nation, you make a bunch of jokes, and you can feel the readers get rested as the jokes come by. They don't like it. They want things. I used to call it miserableism. That they really want. My father used to say that when my father was here for the London Times in the late 20s, early 30s, and he said, then later he went off and joined the Communist Party in Europe and fought in Spain. But when he was here, he said he used to go by every day. He'd go by Union Square, and there'd be an organizer out there, a commie, and the commie would be saying, "Comrades, even as I speak, hundreds of thousands of our brothers and sisters are groaning in the dungeons of the British Raj, and hundreds more thousands are writhing under the blood-stained lash of fascism in Latin America. Everywhere around the world, comrades are shuddering under the boot of fascism. Comrades, join the Communist Party." That kind of wasn't very alluring.
Yeah, well, I saw that when the New Left arose here, and the old left, which is mostly the USCP, didn't really like the way they acted and the rest. And at least the Jewish communists in New York City, which were by far the majority here, I think, they were very straight, middle-class people. And that isn't what the young people of that time were looking forward to. They were looking to escape that kind of Puritan tradition.
Well, there are funny traditions. There's the surrealist tradition. There's the anarchic tradition. You're an anarchist. But for some reason, left and humour just don't seem to make it very good. Too bad. Anyway, as for effect, I think you can write. I mean, I do a syndicated column. I'm always amazed what they'll print, provided you tell a simple story and put the facts in the right order.
So if you've been, your articles don't get cut, do they? Or you wouldn't.
Well, syndication, they can use it or they can't. But I mean,
No, I mean use part of something, cut something out of it.
Oh, they might cut a line or two out of it. But you can write pretty much anything if you do it in a certain way. Most newspapering is a desperate attempt to keep the news away. You know.
Well, I thought it was to sell underwear.
Yeah, well, that's the basic function, is to sell underwear. And then the rest of it is an editing process to try and remove all interesting subject matter from the agenda of the people. And occasionally, something gets through. If you think of it that way around, you're onto something. Like, I remember I'm just doing a book now with a friend of mine, Jeffrey, on, CIA drug stuff. And it shall be out in June. Now, there's incredible evidence from 1945 on. I mean, volumes of it, that the CIA has been implicated with, drug importing criminals. It began with Lucky Luciano, actually, in the alliance in the war. Every 5 years, someone puts this story up, and every 5 years, the mainstream press shoot it down. The last one it happened to was Gary Webb on the San Jose Mercury News in 1996. He published a very detailed story about, the Contras, the CIA, and how the Contras and the CIA took guns down to give to the Contras and then flew back cocaine on the way back to raise money to pay for the whole Contra war. He put the story up, and as probably many people remember, every major newspaper went after him. The Times went after him, the New York Times, the LA Times went after him, the Washington Post went after him. And effectively, actually, by the time they were done, they'd forced the San Jose Mercury News to retract. They'd pretty much forced the San Jose Mercury News to force him out of his job. He's no longer in journalism now. Yet everything he said was absolutely incontrovertible, based on documents. It was the first time a major story, and this is, I think, why they freaked out, the powers that be, that all the documentation was on the web. I'm not a web guy, but you could read his story, and you could actually see, he'd say, according to a grand jury testimony, which he had, there it was. According to this document, there it was, and people could get it. And I think that it was a search and destroy operation because the story was edging into view in a way that was very discomforting and worrying to
So
them.
then the web is, you better get into this, liable to have some kind of important effect on journalism and spreading information.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag, I think. Obviously there were tons of things on the web that people weren't able to get, starting with government documents. I mean, the other day, we were doing a story, a friend of mine and I were doing a story on, Gulf War syndrome and all that. And we used 3 separate government reports. Now, in the old days, to get a GAO report or to get this report or that report, you'd have to go down to the other library that chances are wouldn't be there, or you'd have to send off the government a printing office and it cost you $20. Now, these days, Jeffrey, the guy I wrote with, pressed a button and he had them. That is a huge service.
And not only journalists can get them.
People
Anybody.
can get them. Anybody can
Real
get them.
people.
The downside is that an awful lot of hogwash goes around. And people, hogwash just, tidal waves of it go around. And people's capacity for believing nonsense is very, very large. That's unfortunate. The third thing is that very often I work with, lots of interns and people, that they tend to think research is like punching up Nexus on the internet. Now, Nexus is an expensive service where, it's old newspaper articles. Like you want a story from the New York Times or the Washington Post from 1993, you put in the code word CIA, you put in the word...
You mean they don't go after new information?
Well, they'll get all the stories. That's useful. But, very often, there might be an interesting book in the library. Which the
libraries, right? We
remember the libraries?
Yeah.
No, the library these days is a place where you have cocktail
But
parties.
they're going to put, I remember saying that with microfilm, this was like 40 years ago, you could put the entire Library of Congress on your desk, but you couldn't find anything.
That's right.
But eventually, they're doing more and more of that, that you'll be able to, eventually, if we live long enough and survive all the coming tragedies, you'll be able to get books into your home from
Tuli, I
the
bet you
library.
we're sitting here in your apartment and there's tons of books on the wall here, which the
I've read
viewers
them
can't
all
see.
twice.
I bet you most of these books will never get on any kind of...
Well, that's true. But
And these are all interesting books. Oh, he's doing a
That's
shot of
true.
them. Look at that. Do you ever see so
That's
many books
true.
in your life?
Wow. Books.
6,000, I counted them.
6,000 books.
you counted them. You're not supposed to. count them. Tuli.
So on this theory that newspapers are basically devices to stop people understanding the news. So I guess we should be in favor of the web from that point of view.
You know what's very interesting is to look at advertisements and turn the mute off. I mean, turn the mute on.
Right.
And then you'll see how stupid they are. You know, people jumping around, jumping through hoops, taking a crap, God knows what, smashing eggs. And then when the language comes on, you listen and it makes a kind of sense. It makes a puts a grammatical order to this insanity trying to get you to buy things you don't need. So words, you know, language is also used to deceive.
Like, look at corrections in newspapers. I mean, every day the New York Times runs a correction. It says, yesterday we referred to Mr. Kupferberg as Mr. Peter Kupferberg, and his name is not. It's Mr. Tuli
And
Kupferberg.
Sir Kupferberg, and he's not really.
And
he
that,
would
what does
never
that really
accept
say?
the title.
It says that everything else we said in the paper yesterday was true.
Yeah, someone.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, that's a function of that.
Never thought of that.
I have a collection of journalistic papers, and one journalist, or maybe even a judge, says everyone knows that papers lie all the time, but don't tell the truth. Anyone who's ever been involved in a story that's reported can tell you this instantly. If you've been there, you know.
Well, isn't there a difference in American journalism and European journalism in that Europeans don't bother trying to be...
The Making of Orwell tells the previously untold story of George Orwell's first wife, a woman who shaped, supported, and even saved the life of one of the 20th century's greatest writers. The year before, Eileen had published a futuristic poem called End of the Century, 1984. Later, George would name his greatest work, 1984, in homage to the memory of Eileen. Eileen, The Making of Orwell is written by Sylvia Topp, and their partnership produced some of the greatest works in English literature.